Hey there, it's André with another interview episode with the Impulsive Thinker podcast for the high achieving ADHD entrepreneur. Today's episode is brought to you by Kadak, the Center of ADHD Awareness Canada. Today I've got Fred Feistmann back. As if some of you might remember, he was on the on the
Milestone.
milestone episode, interview 30, which is also known as 61, because I also do the shorts. Um, you know, he used to be a cowboy on a cattle ranch, not a horse ranch. A lot of different experiences from the manufacturing to design room, and he's a wealth advisor to successful families. And his curiosity and need to learn and his ability to collect, integrate, and reframe ideas is one of the reasons I love talking to him. But after that last episode that we recorded, we continued a conversation, and I thought, let's just stop here. We'll hit record, and we're just going to continue it. So, Fred, thanks again for coming back, and I think this would be a wonderful topic to discuss.
Yeah, it's really great to be back. And, that episode 30 for me just energized me. So now the ability to just kind of get that out in another conversation with you, I think it's going to be great. And I did mention in there a little bit that I saw a theme woven through the podcast right from the first episode to the last one that I've listened to, which was number 56. So there's something going on here I wanted to explore with you.
Well, what did you observe?
Well, I observed there's a lot of stuff around kids and family. And I want to bring it back to episode 1 with Nicole. And what she asked you at the end, or maybe you said, I can't remember how it came about, but you said something about the fact, she asked you a question of what would you tell yourself as a child? And you basically said, you should know and understand yourself and be true to you.
Yes, I forgot about that, but you're right.
And yet on that episode 30, we talked about being true to you, understanding yourself, and how that's hearing your story is motivating people to go and do things in their lives to, enhance that. And that's great. But what's really interesting to me is, you had that really great interview, I thought, with Zalia, number 25, and we can talk about that a little bit. And then I just noticed like number 55 here was with Julia Waller with parenting and entrepreneurs, but let's just stay on the parenting side with Unique Ability and Colby. And then number 56, obviously you're talking about kids again. So to me, as a non-ADHD person, when I listen to all of this that you're talking about, particularly that Zalia one, I'm thinking about myself, and I've got a now 15 and 13-year-old coming this year, and all the things that we try to do together that involve me basically coming clean on some not so nice things and how I've acted, treated, and been around. So maybe comment a little bit about this theme that I'm seeing, and what do you think is going on here as to why now we have 4 occurrences that are threaded through.
Well, it's going to be increasing occurrences for sure. Like my answer to Nicole's question, like I said earlier, I've always fought the right to be unique. And I want everyone to be empowered and have the right to be unique. And that's the way to be. ADHD, autism, brain or not, or neurotypical, doesn't matter. Everyone's unique, and everyone has the right to be unique without judgment, without recourse. And that's one of my passions, to just go out there. If that's who you are, own it, move on, and let's get the right people around you. And then for me, with my experience is I didn't have that as a child. Back in the 80s, it was, we had this normative perception of a perfect family and how people were to react and behave. And I didn't fit that mold. So that caused a lot of struggle. I knew I was different. I knew I didn't do exactly the same thing the way everyone else does in my family or anyone around, even in the school system. But I knew that was unique to me. And I fought hard to have the right to do things I think work best for me, being respectful of everyone else, but being shot down all the time. And I want my kids to understand and know about themselves at this age, even how to handle the emotional dysregulation, how to handle emotions, how to handle the resistance you're going to get from the school system when you're resistant follow through. My youngest is a resistant follow through. She cannot follow systematic systems religiously like a follow through will. So she's having challenges getting top marks because she's not showing all of her work. So how can I help her advocate for herself to communicate it, or at least understand this is a losing battle? I know this is the way I am, and I can move on and not feel ashamed or feel stupid that I'm not doing what's being demanded.
I laugh a little bit because that is such a similar conversation with one of my boys that we've had to actually go have to the teachers, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's not going to do it the way you want. He's not going to work backwards from the solution to show you his answer when the answer is right. And and it's exactly what you wanted.
Right.
And we tried to, yeah, go ahead.
And the teacher in this case is, well, I don't know if she was a lucky guess or she actually knew the process. I said, okay, that's great. She'll never show her work. How about you just ask her how she got to the answer?
Right.
And then Sophie's able to go, oh, okay, she understands the concept. She just like me. Why am I going to show 5 steps of equations when I can just do these 3 things at the same time and just skip 3 steps, But in the end, it was like one teacher was okay doing that, while the following year, no, had to show all the steps or no marks. So I left it up to my kid to say, what do you want to do? Here's a scenario. Here's the reality. You can't, with teachers, you always lose. So you got to pick your battles. It's your call and it'll back you up. So if she decides to do all the work, she's fine. If she decides not to, because it's a waste of time, okay. But that's the way she works, but she gets the right answer.
Well, I think there's a big lesson in that for the world as the kids enter the world is, there's certain things that if you have to be in an environment and play by their rules, how do you make the trade-off as to if you're not gonna? And yeah. So, what happened with our son is, there are teachers that will do that, and then there are teachers that won't. And at the end of the day, he's made a conscious choice about the mark that he's willing to have
exactly
in order to not do the whole process. And that to me was the most important learning out of that whole process is know thyself. If you don't want to play the game, understand the trade-off. And if you can live with the trade-off, then I support you fully, because it's his life, his world, his marks, his self-esteem. And that didn't come though with a bit of battling from my side, because as much as I recognize I'm very similar to him and an outlier in how I think and do things, I'm not sure I actually applied it to his circumstance until we realized he gets it. And that's what I, think is great about what you're doing with this podcast as well for kids.
Yeah. And that's a good way of putting it. If you don't want to play the game, you suffer the consequences.
Understand the consequences. Don't have to suffer. He doesn't suffer. He is now in control.
No, you're right. It's understand. But they have that knowledge to make that understanding.
Right.
And then the other thing too, it's not only the teachers, our kids are going to have problems like this. It could be, it's going to be supervisors, co-workers, even in the volunteer, if you're going to volunteer, children's sports, we're all going to have these challenges no matter what. Even as an entrepreneur, I got to get rid of all these headache people. But guess what? A lot of these headache people are my clients too.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So not understanding thyself as a kid is strong. It's great. It's a skill that's good for life. And we all need to know that. And I just find it's very important for my kids. And I know, Fred, this is so true for you too, because we've done some real deep work and vulnerable work, even with our kids, if they can have that skill at a young age to know who they are, how they work best, and this is where they should spend their time and spirit and passion, they're going to have a lot better life than we had. I think more enjoyable. And at an early age, I think they can conquer the world. And you're talking about somebody like, for me, with Zelia on that episode, she shared I gave her the authority and the power to be truly, brutally honest about how I was during that time, during my life tempest, and when my symptoms took over for me. I was not a pleasant person, but I gave her the power to just come out and say it in a respectful way. And she told me some very, it was disturbing, and I didn't realize these things. And at the same time, I was able to have a conversation with her. But something earlier, Fred, you said that you had a conversation with your kids about your triggers. Now, why would you do that?
Well, I'm no different than what you were talking about with Zalia. And I think any parent, if they're honest with themselves, has triggers. I can't speak for everybody, but there are situations that I left and I go, man, that could have been a learning moment. That could have been, we could have laughed about that instead of got angry about that. And the point is, in the we, who is the leader of that emotion? Me. Right. So I can't change everything at once. But at the end of the day, after a couple of repetitions, it's like, oh, there's a theme here, boys. This is triggering me. Here's why I think it's triggering me. What do you think about it? And some things I may not be able to change quite quickly or maybe ever. But what I ask them to do is say, maybe don't trigger me. If you can find a different way to word it, maybe you can find a way to give me a signal, or maybe, let me walk away and I can come back and regroup. These are things that I heard in you with Zalia that I think apply to any parent. And what's really interesting to me is it opens up that dialogue and that empowerment piece on their end, because, if they want to push our buttons, they're gonna.
And
but if they, and they will, and they want to sometimes. But if they don't, then now we've got this little mechanism and this understanding. And plus, I think it helps them come to me and say things that maybe they don't otherwise say, because I'm leading by facing up to the things that I would rather not exhibit. And over time it changes and some don't. Not perfect.
Well, the other thing too there, Fred, is for you to do that takes a lot of self-awareness. I know a lot of people know there's a trigger, but they'll try and just either blame it on someone else and completely say it's you, kid, or it's you, my spouse, and you don't like me, and I'm not going to try and change my ways or realize what it is to come out with a creative solution. So for you to go out and say, hey, kids, or, even to the listener here, even to your spouse or to your family, your parents, your siblings, when you do this, it triggers me and I kind of lose control of my emotions. But by having that self-awareness to understand what the root trigger is, that's informing other people. And if they got respect for you and care for you, they will try to avoid it. Or if you come into the situation again where they triggered you, then you can both look at each other and say, hey, I'm triggered. And then we can understand it.
Well, I think there's a key point on this triggering thing. And there's a neat quote. I'm just going to bring it up here so I don't screw it up. So Viktor Frankl is somebody that, wrote a pretty great book, I think, called Man's Search for Meaning. And without getting into the background, one of his quotes that I have spent like the last 6 years or more trying to embody. And when it comes to triggering, here it is. So his comment is, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and freedom. Okay.
Repeat that one more time.
Between stimulus and response, there is a space. Okay. So let's just say trigger event. There's a space between when you get triggered and what you do with that. Like, what is the recording that starts to play habitually? So in that space is our power to choose our response. Okay. So even if it's a millisecond, there is a space. And then in our response lies our growth and our freedom.
Yes.
So what I'm saying here is, and I can link this back to something you've said in the past about meditation, but I'm really cognizant about getting that space. And it doesn't mean it has to be in time. It could be mentally just slicing that time up to where, oh, there's the trigger, and being self-aware, going, here's what I would have said, I better stop, or starting down that tape, that audio tape or that response tape, and going, whoa, stop this, and just stopping it and leaving, or actually turning it around, whatever it is. But that space to me is really interesting. And perhaps with the ADHD mind, there, it's a bit more, I don't know how that works, like in terms of finding that space, but
Well, that's the challenge, that space. That's where the ADHD brain, if you're very impulsive, there's no filter to prevent that impulsivity from going right out. And that's a challenge. So that's why when you brought that up, I asked you to repeat it, because what you followed up with just completely, it's a great example of where the ADHD brain in a person has to be a lot more aware that when we get triggered, we have a small spot. You're saying it's a space. It's very small in most cases, but for us, it almost seems smaller, that we got to jump in there and stop our response. And usually it's our response that causes the issues and the challenges. The stimulus, the trigger, the feeling, the emotion, there's nothing wrong with it. You're allowed to feel that, to get that. Yet it's the quick decision making to say, do I react? Does my fight or flight response kick in, which is very predominant with the ADHD brain? Or do we, working with mindfulness meditation, just to be present, to say, whoa, we got to take a breath, check that response, and then decide our response. I think is very key. So I think it's frafantastic quote to share with everyone. You said the guy's name is
Victor, Viktor Frankl, Frankl.
Yeah. Okay, good.
He's got many quotes like that. He is a very interesting man.
Yeah. And then let's put it on top. Let's throw kids in there, ADHD or not, they really, like, that response time can be very short, because they always seem to sucker punch you at the wrong time, when you're tired, when you're stressed, when you're rushing out to do something. So I think this is relevant to everyone and anyone that's listening here. And to everyone.
No, and you can only laugh at it because there are times when they are truly trying to push your buttons. And then there's the innocent times, right, where they just do it and you're like, oh, really? So yeah, back to the kid thing. If you were to say, like, how does one in your mind start giving them that sense of self and how to use their energy, what battles to fight, what battles, not battles to fight, that's the wrong way to say it, that's too confrontational, what they're willing to trade off for one thing or another because they know that self? Like, where would one start with that?
Well, the one thing to start is to look at your kids or someone else as not being you. They don't do the things the way that you do it. So what makes them unique, that's different from you, that they can get the results? Like, if they keep fighting you, they don't want to do it a certain way. I start asking my kids, and how do you want to do it? How do you plan to do it? They know, and that's what I love about kids. They know what they do well. They know, but they can't explain it. They just know, because at a young age, my oldest is now 13. Now they're starting to get peer pressure. She's starting to understand the world has a certain view of certain things. But from infant to 8 or 9, they know what they do well instinctively. So just let them do it, and try more guidance rather than telling them what to do and how to do it. Guide them to what the result we want, or we want to be achieved, and have them explain how they want to achieve it, on what schedule and whatnot. If you don't want to get into assessment, it's just observing how your kids work, and for you to get that bias out of your eyes and out of your mind, that if they don't do it, if you're like my oldest, she's very systematic. She needs lists or she can't do anything a day. But then there's my youngest that doesn't need lists. If she has lists, it restricts her. And to understand those two differences, and not to enforce a list taking or creation for my youngest versus my oldest, you got to be really true to yourself to say, hey man, they don't work the way I do. Let's try it their way and just see where it goes.
Okay, so that's really big of you in terms of having that language, that understanding, that viewpoint. How did you get there?
I got there because I started learning about myself and my strengths and getting an understanding that people don't work the same way I do. So being, Colby, working with Kathy Colby, with Colby Corp, Clifton Strengths, and then having a lot of conversations with people like you, Fred, Julia Waller, Shannon Waller, um, just a lot of like-minded people to start observing how to identify how people work different. Like, I'm a deep diver. I like to learn a lot of different stuff, but at the same time, I saw my kids were struggling at school. They were even struggling in the house because of we're fighting on how to do things. Even though we want the dishes done, we want them clean and put away, but we're starting to argue about the process. And what are you arguing the most about? Is it the end result, or is it how to get to the end result? I think for me was the big revelation is to stop arguing about the process, get them involved on the plan, and then are more likely to buy in. But I think also, Fred, what you've done with your kids by opening up and saying, these are my triggers, or this is where I'm struggling. This is where I don't like, this is not how I prefer to do things. Just having those conversations helps the kids, empower them to self-reflect, to understand that people don't all do the same thing the same way. And just to have that open conversation leads to, I think like you just said, that your kids are able to approach you with more challenges or different ways of doing things because you've opened up, made that conversation acceptable.
Right. And they also know they're not always going to get the answer they would like.
Right. And kids and adults need to understand that too. You don't always get the answer you want. And we have to learn how to deal with those differences and move on and not just be stuck in our ways.
Right on. Well, I mean, this has been really interesting. If you had to wrap up the last, well, there's been 3 or 4 episodes that I know you've done on kids and know thyself. I mean, what would you say is the reason this theme is weaving itself through your podcast?
It's starting to weave because in a way, I didn't have it when I was young. And I want that to, I remember saying this to Shannon Waller once. We're leaving the Colby conference one year, and I replied to her, I says, I just want to save kids and save them so they can be free to be unique and be themselves. And I think having a conversation with Zidia, with Julia, now with you, is it's going to be a trend that's going to come on, because the more we help our kids, the more I'm learning about myself. And as entrepreneurs, if we want to empower our staff and ourselves to do stuff, why are we ignoring our kids? Let's give them the gift early, because we have that power. We have the time. We have the means and the freedom to do that. And if we can just help grow our kids to be the best of who they are and how they work best, I think that's where I can make a change in people's lives, is by helping their kids become stronger.
I can't wait. So a lot of the ones that we're hearing about on mental health in men and that sort of thing are them looking back at an older age as to wish I would have, or, circumstances, ended up being at this age, I could do this. I can't wait, André, until some of the kids you impact now are old enough. Well, they're obviously with Zaya, she's already old enough. She's very articulate. But I mean, let's say another decade from now can come back and talk to you about how you accelerated their progress towards not having to tell themselves their childhood self 30 years from now, but maybe only 5 or 10.
Right. And that's a long-term goal.
Pretty cool.
Well, thanks again, Fred. Love this conversation. And like you pointed out, it's going to be a recurring theme, because I think as much as we can help our kids, we're going to help ourselves a lot more. And for us to help our kids understand themselves better, you need to understand yourself better. And I think it's a win-win for everyone. So thanks again for listening. If you like what you heard today, subscribe to the podcast, please. And if you heard it is beneficial to someone, share with your kids. I know I've heard some kids have listened to my episodes and they enjoyed it. Please share it with 2 or 3 friends. You can give me a rating. It'd be greatly appreciated. Thanks again, Fred. Love having a chat with you anytime.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And you, the listener, thanks again. And I want to hear from you. What resonated with you about this chat? You can send me an email at questions@theimpulsivethinker.com or at the website. Thanks again for listening, and I thank you for your time.